Okay, welcome to Psychology 164, the Social Cognition course. I'm John KIHLSTROM. I'll be the instructor for the course. I'm a professor in the Department of Psychology, and I'm also involved with the Cognitive Science program, so many of you have had contact with me one way or the other. Most of you are psychology or cognitive science majors. Some of you are not, which is okay too. We like that kind of diversity. There's my contact information. This class meets until 11 o'clock Monday and Wednesday. Monday and Wednesday from 11 to 12, I'll have regular office hours over in my office in Tolman Hall on the 3rd floor, psychology side. But I'm also going to try to get to this room on Mondays and Wednesdays relatively early. So if you can't make office hours, but you can get here a little bit early, you want to make contact, you can do that. We can also meet by appointment. We can also make email arrangements. There's all that information. Let me introduce you to the graduate student instructors who are going to help us out in this course. First, Andrea Urqueta Arfalo, who's a developmental psychology student, specializes in infancy, socio-emotional development, and all sorts of stuff like that. She's going to handle 3 of the sections, 101, 102, and 106, I think. That's right? Does that look right? Okay. And then Kevin Udich, also a developmental psychology student, specializes in somewhat older children, including college sophomores. So you will get that kind of emphasis from him. There are no discussion sections this week, not least because half the discussion sections were yesterday, okay? The other half are today, but we're not going to meet this week. There's just too much mayhem first week of classes. But we will have discussion sections beginning next week, so you should make sure that you go. Discussion sections are a scarce resource, so they're here for your benefit, and we want you to participate in them. Entry into the course is through discussion sections. It doesn't matter where you're waitlisted for the lecture. What matters is where you're waitlisted for the discussion section. If you're not waitlisted for the discussion section and you want to be in the course, get waitlisted for a discussion section. 2 of the sections, I think it's 103 and 104, are completely full. They're oversubscribed. If somebody drops out, we'll move somebody in. But if you want to maximize your chance of getting into the course, what you need to do is to put yourself on the wait list for a discussion section that's not already full, okay? And that will do that. We'll admit students to the course as space becomes available. There are actually, technically, I think something like 11 seats left. We'll give those to seniors and juniors who are psych or cog-sci majors, because other people will have another chance to take this course. I give this course in the spring of every even-numbered year, like this year. Okay, so you get lectures from me, but there are also some readings. The required text is a text on social cognition. There are not too many such textbooks around. This is the best of them, by Susan Fisk at Princeton and Shelley Taylor at UCLA. This is the original paperback version of the text, which I see some of you have. The publishing industry is almost as bad as the financial industry. Publishing industry let this book go out of print, and then now print it on demand. So the version of the text that's available in your in the ASUC bookstore looks like this, but it's got the same title, same authors. It is exactly the same text. So if you've already got this, or you bought it from an internet vendor or whatever, that's fine. If you get this from the ASUC bookstore, they're exactly the same. You guys are going to probably want to have a seat, because we're going to go the full 50 minutes. Okay, so that's the main text, and we will go through it. We were not going to read the chapters in order. I arranged things a little bit differently, but we will do the entire text. There are 2 other texts that I want you to get. First is Eviatar Zerubbabel's Social Mindscapes, which he characterizes as an introduction to cognitive sociology. Sociology of knowledge is a very interesting aspect of social psychology and social cognition. So this isn't just a psychology course. This is also supposed to be a cognitive science course. We reach a little bit further beyond the disciplinary confines of psychology. So that's one way in which we'll do this. And then the third text, which we'll focus on in discussion section, I won't have much to say about it in lecture, is a novel. So you get a little exposure to the arts and humanities as well. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon is a slender mystery that is ostensibly written from the point of view of an autistic child, a child who doesn't have any social cognition capacities, ostensibly. That's one theory of autism, as we'll discuss later. But what I want you to do is to use this novel as a vehicle for thinking about what social cognition buys you and what it doesn't buy you in terms of social relationships. One of the ways in which we find out what the function of something is to look at what happens when it's not there. And this is a book, a novel, written from the perspective of somebody who really does not have the capacity to understand what's going on in other people's minds, which is what the essence of social cognition is. So it's those three things: Fisk and Taylor, Zerubbabel, and the Haddon novel. Okay, there's a course website. It's a very extensive website. Those of you who have had me in other classes know what my websites look like. So you go right to BSpace. If you're enrolled in the course or you're waitlisted, you've automatically been given access to this website, and you've probably received one or two announcements from me already. But there should be a tab on your own BSpace site that looks like this, as it's like 164 or something like that for spring 2010. That's when you click on that, this is what you get. You'll find a copy of the syllabus for when you lose the one that's in your hands. There's a schedule. All the deadlines and basically the whole plan for the course is outlined on this calendar. And then there's a grade book, which we'll add to from time to time during the class. All the illustrations for my lectures are posted to the course website. I put up a preliminary set before the lecture, which most of you should have gotten an announcement of, like yesterday or maybe Monday. And then at the end of each set of lectures, then I post an updated set. So if you click on the Lecture Illustrations tab, you're taken to a page that looks like this. This is the good for note-taking, bad for the tree, 3 per page format. This is the bad for note-taking, but better for the tree, 6 per page note set. So let your conscience be your guide. I have my own particular point of view on social cognition, and there just isn't enough time, 14 weeks, 2 hours of lecture a week, to give you everything that I would like to give you. So I've prepared a set of lecture supplements which go way beyond the lectures that I'm able to give here. To the extent that you've got intrinsic interest in social cognition, you'll probably find some material there of interest. There's nothing in these that's not required, there's nothing in here that's required, except insofar as they contain some lecture material, which of course you're responsible for. But if you want a somewhat more in-depth examination of various topics, you'll find a good place to start there. This course is webcast. That's why I'm wearing this. It's not the only reason, but it's a primary reason. There's definitely going to be a podcast, so you can go to webcast.berkeley.edu and download the audio of lectures in case you miss something, like you're sick or it's raining too hard or whatever. The Educational Technology Services is experimenting with a new system called Screencast. If it works, and it didn't work last semester, but if it works, you can download the slides as well as the audio. So you actually never have to get out of your pajamas if you don't want to. I teach some other courses here at the university. Some of you will know me from Psychology 1, the Introductory General Psychology course. I also teach a course on consciousness, and from time to time I teach a course on memory. Those courses too have websites, and we have tabs that will link you to those course websites as well, at least to the lecture supplements for those websites. If you're coming in here with a relatively weak background in general psychology, for example, you don't know the basics of perception or memory or something like that, you better get some of that background because I'm going to assume you've got it, either by virtue of having taken Psych 1 or by virtue of taking Cog Sci 1. But if you want to brush up on something, you'll probably find most of what you need there. That's what it's there for. Course has one midterm and one final exam. The midterm is scheduled for the middle of March, right before you go away for spring break. The final exam is scheduled for exam week, Tuesday of exam week, from 3 to 6 p.m. That final exam will have 1 hour, which is essentially a non-cumulative midterm. It'll cover the materials since the midterm exam. And then there'll be a cumulative portion that gives you a chance to kind of look back on the course as a whole. Because of the size of the course and for a lot of other good reasons as well, the exams are, they're not multiple choice, but they are short answer, very short answer, okay? And they emphasize basic concepts and principles. They're intended to be easily, reliably, and quickly graded. I give equal emphasis to the readings and to the lectures in these exams. Have a policy about makeups, which is that I don't do them, okay? I'll be here for the exams. I expect you to be here for the exams too. If something horrible happens, your grandmother has a motorcycle accident in Tijuana or something like that, and you have to go bail her out, do it, okay? Take care of business, and then we'll deal with it, right? But in basically, well, that's not basically, there are absolutely no makeups for exams. It's hard enough to write and grade one exam. We're not going to write and grade 2 exams, okay? So that's just the policy. Discussion sections, as I say, they don't meet this week. They will begin to meet next week. They're led by Andrea and Kevin. The format for the discussion sections is for maybe the first 20, 25 minutes, first half of the discussion section, Andrea and Kevin will present you some material that is not expressly covered in the lecture necessarily, but kind of takes off from what you're listening to from me or what you're reading about in the text. And then the remainder of the time will be devoted to questions and comments and discussion and all those things. As I say, discussion sections are a scarce resource here, so we expect you to be there. You get points for attendance. You get points for participation. In addition, we have some opportunities for you to do a little bit of writing and idea sharing in this course. So if you look on the syllabus, you'll see that there are 9 required internet forum postings. There's a question that I pose, and I want you to respond to it with a short essay. 250 words is just fine. 50 words is just fine. 25 words, probably not fine, but it doesn't have to be anything long, all right? The idea is for you to take the question, think about it, and then post a response. The GSIs will be reading these and giving you some feedback, not on every one, but on roughly a third of them across the course of the semester. But the way these forum postings are dealt with, there are 9 of them, okay? We want to give you some experience in producing a kind of fairly well-organized the argument that's supported by evidence, whether it's empirical evidence or considerations of some kind of empirically supported theory. That shows that you can communicate your ideas fairly effectively in written form, and also show that you can think critically about some of the material in the course. The deadlines are always Sunday night, basically midnight between Sunday and Monday, just like Cinderella. And just like Cinderella, if you miss them, it's over, okay? So on Monday or Tuesday, the GSIs will go through the postings for their section, give you credit if you made the deadline, and if you posted something reasonable. Okay, you can't put up printer's Greek or something like that and get credit. But basically, the credit for these things is all or none. Okay, if you put up something, if you post something that's reasonable response to the question by the deadline, you get 5 points. If you don't, if it's not up by the deadline or if it's not a reasonable response, you don't get credit. As I say, you will get some feedback. You'll get some feedback from the GSIs. You might get some feedback from me. But also, the reason for posting these publicly is so you can get a discussion going among other people in your discussion section, okay? So if you say something particularly interesting, somebody can respond to it. If you say something particularly outrageous, somebody can respond to it or whatever, and then so you can get the exchange of ideas going even on the web. Here on the forum tab of the course website, there is first a forum where you can post comments and questions. I'll do my best to take questions in lecture, but there are a lot of you. There's only one of me, and there's only so many hours in the day. So if I don't get to address any question you might have, put it up on the comments and queries forum. I check that every day, and I'll respond to it within roughly 24 hours and get a discussion going that way. In addition, you can see that there are other fora for the various forum postings. They're listed by section, so you can just click on the forum that's appropriate to the posting, and then click on the topic that's appropriate to your section, type in or paste in your comment, and post it, and you're done. Here's how we calculate grades. Total number of points available for the course is 225. The midterm is worth 50 points. Final exam is double that, 100 points. Discussion section is 1/3 of your credits, so it's 1/3 of your points, 75 points. Attendance and participation will give you 30 points. Completing the required forum postings will give you another 45 points. That's 9 postings at 5 points each. Here are the grading standards for the course. If you accumulate at least 90% of the available points, that's more than 202 points, you're guaranteed some kind of A. If you accumulate at least 80% of the available points, you're guaranteed some kind of B. The standards for a C are somewhat less rigorous. 50% plus 1, you're guaranteed some kind of C in the course. That's to allow people to kind of take an intellectual risk with a course like this. If you find out it's just not going really well for you, if you can keep your head above water, you'll at least get a C. You have to work really hard in my classes to get an F. In fact, I've been teaching for 35 years and I've never done it. The closest I came was a kid. I used to teach at Harvard, and at Harvard, if you get an F, you can retake the course, or at least you could then. So I had this kid once who dared me to give him an F, and I'll just retake the course. So I gave him a D. But that was the meanest I've ever been as an instructor, and I don't expect to have to do that too often, okay? So that's the course. We're going to talk a little bit about the domain of social cognition in a minute, but are there any quick questions about the organization and format of the course? Anything at all? Can everybody hear me okay in the back? All right. Okay, so let's see if we can figure out what we're doing in this class. Okay, it's a cognitive science course, but it's basically a psychology course as well. Psychology is part of cognitive science. And what psychology is all about is mental life. Psychology is the science that tries to understand how your mind works, tries to understand the nature of mental structures and processes, which come in 3 basic forms: cognitive structures and processes having to do with knowledge and belief, emotional structures and processes that have to do with feelings and affects and moods, and motivational structures and processes that have to do with the individual's desires and goals and intentions. Psychology is sometimes thought of as a behavioral science because in one sense, the goal of psychology is not just to figure out how the mind works, but also to explain behavior. But the psychological analysis of behavior has a particular quality to it, which is that a psychological analysis of behavior always refers to the mind of the individual. When we say, why did John do what he did, a psychological explanation always comes in the form of, John did what he did because he thought X, or he felt Y, or he wanted Z. Psychologists always explain behavior in terms of the individual's mental structures and processes. That's a level of analysis that's quite different from the way a biologist would explain behavior. Biologists would explain behavior in terms of synaptic transmission and muscles and the flow of endocrines through the bloodstream and genes and all sorts of things like that. It's quite different from the way a sociologist or an anthropologist would explain behavior. Sociologists and anthropologists explain behavior with reference to social structures and social processes. He did this because he's of lower class. He did this because he's in a particular culture, or he belongs to a particular kind of group, or whatever. Psychological explanations of behavior always refer to the individual's mind, the individual's cognition, emotion, and motivation. Okay? So cognitive psychology is a major subfield within psychology and deals primarily with questions about knowledge and belief. Where does knowledge come from? What kinds of beliefs do we have? How are our beliefs structured? And all of that. So if you look through the table of contents of a basic cognitive psychology textbook, you'll see chapters that look like this. Typically, cognitive psychology begins with problems of sensation and perception, because the whole idea behind psychology historically is that a great deal of our knowledge is acquired through experience. So you want to know something about the cognitive structures that allow us to have experiences of the objects and events in the world. Cognitive psychology also includes references, a discussion of learning, how we acquire knowledge through experience. Memory, how knowledge is stored and represented in the mind. Thinking, a broad term that refers to all sorts of ways we use knowledge. Reasoning, problem solving, judgment, decision making. Not only using knowledge, but also transforming knowledge and generating knowledge through these same kinds of thought processes. Language is part of the domain of cognitive psychology, first because we use language as a tool for thought. We use language as a means of representing knowledge, but also we use language as a vehicle for communicating what we know to other people. In social cognition, one of the primary ways in which we have of knowing what another person is thinking, feeling, and wanting, okay, is what they say about what they think and feel and want. It's not our only way, but it's one way. Social cognition, just like any other aspect of cognition, develops. There's an idea that the children in some ways may think differently than adults do. Older adults may have cognitive abilities or lack cognitive abilities that younger adults do. So we have a developmental trajectory to cognition that has to be thought about. Individual differences in cognition, like individual differences in intelligence, also part of cognitive psychology. And then finally, because psychology is both a social science interested in problems of knowledge and meaning, it's also a biological science interested in the biological substrates of mind and behavior. Most cognitive psychology courses these days make a lot of reference to brain science, how we understand through neuropsychology and other aspects of neuroscience what's going on in the brain when people sense and perceive and learn and remember and think and speak and understand language and all of that business. Social psychology has many of the same kinds of properties, but if psychology is the science of mental life, okay, and if cognitive psychology focuses on one aspect of mental life, problems of knowledge and belief, social psychology tries to connect the individual level of analysis to the social world outside the individual. Social psychology is primarily concerned with the relationship between mental structures and processes that reside in the mind of the individual and structures and processes that exist in the social world outside the individual. So how our thoughts and feelings and goals are shaped by the people we're with, by the institutions that we're part of, other kinds of social structures. Social psychology and cognitive psychology come together with the problem of social cognition. Okay, that's what we're doing. We're bringing those two major subfields of psychology together. And there are two aspects of social cognition that we want to talk about a lot. First, beginning next week, we'll talk about the general idea that social behavior is cognitively mediated, that our interactions with other people are mediated by our knowledge and beliefs about the social domain, how we perceive other people, what we remember from previous encounters with them, how we solve the problem of getting along or competing with those people. That's what social cognition is all about. It is sometimes taught in social psychology courses that what social psychology is all about is the effect of the situation on the individual. That's not true, but that's how some poverty-stricken social psychologists think about their field. The important thing from the point of view of cognitive psychology, however, is that it's not the situation that controls the individual's behavior. It's the individual's perception of the situation. It's the mental representation of the situation that leads us to behave the way we do, not the objective situation as it might be described in some kind of physical terms. So the study of social cognition begins with an understanding of how social behavior is cognitively mediated. Yes, it's emotionally mediated and it's motivationally mediated as well. Those guys can get their own courses. We're going to talk about the cognitive mediation of social behavior. And mostly, however, we're going to talk about the cognition of social objects. Social objects including other people, ourselves, the situations in which we encounter them, and the behavior that transpires between us when we meet them. Those are social objects. And what we want to do in this course is to try to understand how we perceive and remember and think about and learn about and communicate all those kinds of social objects. So this course is basically structured just like any other course in cognitive psychology, with the exception that all the objects of cognition are always social in nature. The objects of cognition are always people, whether it's other people or ourselves, or various kinds of social situations. Okay, so there's a sense in which you can just think about a course in social cognition as a course in cognitive psychology that happens to be applied to the social domain. You could imagine a course in color perception. In fact, at Berkeley, we do have a course in color perception, where we think about perception of color. Those are the objects, and we want to know how we perceive them. But it turns out that social cognition and non-social cognition don't overlap completely. There are major differences between cognition, when you think about cognition of inanimate objects like mugs or Necker cubes or visual illusions or whatever, and cognition about people. We're going to start in this class from the assumption that the same principles that we understand apply to cognition in the non-social domain also apply in the social domain. But it's going to become very apparent very quickly that that's not true. That's just a starting assumption that provides a framework for the course, because it turns out that social cognition and non-social cognition differ in very important ways. Some of these ways are what I'd characterize as quantitative differences. There are differences in degree between the social case and the non-social case. It is fundamental doctrine in cognitive psychology that the stimulus for cognition is impoverished, vague, fragmentary. What the perceiver has to do is to add something to the stimulus, to extract information from the stimulus, but also bring knowledge from memory and past experience to bear on the act of perceiving. That's true whether you're looking at a Necker cube or a standard figure ground, or you're memorizing a list of words or whatever. The stimulus needs to be supplemented by knowledge drawn from memory. But it turns out to be especially true in the social case. In the social case, when we look at some people, what's the stimulus for social cognition? It's other people and their behavior. And other people and their behavior that's very ambiguous stuff. You walk up to somebody and you say, gee, I wonder if she likes me or not. You don't know. You don't wear a sign that says, I like you very much, right on the forehead. You got to figure this out. And the way you figure this out is by picking up on cues. And all. Sometimes you make too much of those cues. Sometimes you make too little of those cues. But you're still trying to pick up on these very ambiguous cues. Behavior is very ambiguous. You walk across campus and you see two kids fighting. You might think, geez, that's something that, I ought to break up. You go over and you break it up. And the next thing you know, you've interrupted somebody from the film department who's making a movie for his senior thesis, right? The behavior is ambiguous. Social behavior is inherently ambiguous. We have to figure it out, okay? All stimulation is ambiguous in that sense, but social stimuli are even more so. The ambiguity of the social situation comes in part from the fact that there are so many different kinds of clues that may be in conflict. You're talking to somebody and she's smiling at you, but there's something in the tone of voice that makes you think that maybe that smile isn't quite right. Well, what are you going to go with? You got to resolve that conflict. There are also lots of context effects that you have to deal with. The meaning of social behavior changes a lot depending on the context in which that social behavior occurs. Here's a very good example of this from the terror attacks on the World Trade Center in September 11th, 2001. Famous picture taken from the Brooklyn Esplanade across the river, looking towards Manhattan. And a number, look at this. I mean, there's the World Trade Center going up in smoke, and there are these people here. What are they doing? You don't really know what they're doing. Frank Rich, writing in the New York Times, was outraged by this picture. He said, I can only, this is a country that likes to move on and fast. These young people aren't necessarily callous. So writes Frank Rich, meaning, of course, they are necessarily callous. They look like they're ignoring this whole thing. Thomas Hepker says, they just seemed totally relaxed, like it was any normal afternoon. They were just chatting away. It's possible they lost people and cared, but they certainly didn't look at it. Whereas David Plotz, looking at exactly the same picture, says these individuals have turned toward each other for solace and for debate. Same stimulus, three quite different representations of this event. And you get three quite different representations of the event because all the information you need to perceive the stimulus isn't provided by the stimulus itself. You've got to know more about the context. If I had just shown you a picture of these people without this part, you'd say, oh, they're chatting away on a nice afternoon on the Brooklyn Esplanade. You put this in the context, the meaning begins to change quite a bit. These individuals actually reacted to these newspaper columns. What are you talking about? Of course we were concerned. We were a bunch of New Yorkers in the middle of an animated discussion about what had just happened. Another participant says, it was genetically impossible for me to be unaffected by this event. So what this event looked like from the point of view of the participants was very different from that same event in terms of what it looked like from the point of view of an external observer. The social situation is inherently vague and ambiguous. the information supplied by the social stimulus is very fragmentary and impoverished. We have to think about what we're looking at in order to make sense of it. And of course, when we construct our perceptions of the social world in this way, we bring our own prejudices and assumptions to bear on the task as well. Here is a very historically very important example from the New Hampshire primaries of 1972. This is Edwin Muskie, then the senator from Maine, who was campaigning in the New Hampshire primary. You can't see it from here, but he's coming out of the doorway of the offices of the Manchester Union Leader, the leading newspaper in New Hampshire. A newspaper is so conservative, Attila the Hun looks like a leftist. And they had just criticized Muskie, and especially criticized Muskie's wife on some matter, whatever it was, it doesn't matter. And Muskie comes out and holds an impromptu press conference on the steps of the office, and it looks like he's crying. Of course, he's also giving this impromptu press conference in the middle of a famous New Hampshire snowstorm. It's February in New Hampshire. Snow's coming down. Are those tears, or are those snowflakes melting on his face? It makes a big difference how you're going to perceive this guy as a political candidate, because especially in 1972, male presidential candidates weren't supposed to cry. Female presidential candidates weren't supposed to cry either. So in the last presidential election, you'll remember Hillary Rodham Clinton, the senator from New York, had her own Muskie moment also in the New Hampshire primary when she was asked about how she was bearing up under the criticism that was being sent her way in the press. And she looks like she's kind of welling up there. There's not, you can't actually see a tear, but her eyes are glistening up. William Crystal, okay, commentator on Fox News, says she pretended to cry, okay, kind of a ploy for sympathy. Britt Hume says, I don't think so. Same stimulus. William Crystal bringing one set of feelings and attitudes and beliefs to this stimulus. Britt Hume bringing another set of feelings and attitudes and beliefs. The stimulus is vague and fragmentary and impoverished. All stimuli are vague and fragmentary and impoverished. Social stimuli, just the more so. Okay, so in these examples, we can see another way in which social cognition and non-social cognition are quantitatively different. That is, they differ from each other in degree, because it turns out that emotional and motivational processes have more to work with in social cognition than they do in non-social cognition. Yes, there's a famous experiment that shows that poor children in the Depression thought that a quarter was bigger than it was, right? As opposed to rich kids in the Depression who thought that a quarter was smaller than it was. That's an example of emotional and motivational influences on non-social cognition. But if you think about it for just half a nanosecond, you'll see that when you're trying to make sense of the social world, the mood we're in, what we want, what our goals are, is going to have a tremendous impact on how we think about the social world. Again, that's true in non-social cognition. It's just more true in social cognition. Okay? But there are also what I think of as some qualitative differences. Differences not just in degree, but differences in kind. Certain aspects of social cognition that don't have their counterpart to any degree in the non-social case. One possibility is that there are different brain structures dedicated to social cognition compared to non-social cognition. This is a question that we'll talk about towards the end of the semester when we look at social neuropsychology and social neuroscience. But it's entirely possible that given the modular structure of the brain, that social perception is performed by a different set of brain structures than non-social perception is. To the extent that that's true, that would be a qualitative difference between social and non-social cognition. Another qualitative difference between social and non-social cognition has to do with the subject-object distinction. If I hold this up and I say, what is it? And you say, it's a very old cell phone. You really ought to get a new contract, okay? I'll die with this cell phone in my hands. I am not getting a new cell phone. But the fact of the matter is, there's you and there's this thing, okay? You're the subject. This is the object of your perception, and there's a very clear distinction between them. That's not always the case in social cognition, not least because a major aspect of social cognition is ourselves. We're trying to perceive and make sense of our own behavior and our own feelings and our own desires. The subject-object distinction can break down quite quickly in the social domain in a way in which it doesn't really break down in the non-social domain. You hold up a non-social object and you know it's not you, right? But when you're examining yourself, your own feelings, your own motives, your own beliefs, your own desires, the subject of cognition and the object of cognition are the same thing, which is pretty interesting, okay? The biggest qualitative difference between social cognition, however, and non-social cognition is that in social cognition, the object of cognition is, like the subject of cognition, a sentient being, a person who is aware, who has beliefs and feelings and desires, just like the perceiver has beliefs and feelings and desires. In social cognition, the object of cognition being other people, they're intelligent the way we are, and they're conscious the way we are. They have awareness and they have desires the same way we do. Moreover, when I hold this up and ask you what it is, it doesn't know what I'm doing, right? It's just a thing, you know? But the object of social cognition is aware that he or she is the object of social cognition. Somebody's looking at me, trying to figure out what I'm doing, what I want, what I'm like, what my traits are, and so on, okay? So I'm aware that I'm the object of somebody else's cognitive processes, but to make it even more interesting, by virtue of being aware that I'm the object of somebody else's cognitive processes, I'm in the business of trying to control those cognitions. That's what the social psychologists call impression management, or the sociologist Irving Goffman called strategic self-presentation. We are always in the process of trying to get other people to perceive us in a particular way. They're trying to perceive us. We're trying to control their perceptions of us. We know they're trying to perceive us, and to make things even more interesting, they know we're trying to control their perceptions, okay? So what happens, where'd this go? What happens is you've got the possibility for what the philosophers would call kind of an indefinite series in social cognition. So you've got a person, a perceiver, who's trying to perceive an object who's also a person. The object of perception knows that the perceiver is trying to perceive the object. The perceiver knows that the object of perception is trying to perceive the object. You can see where this is going, right? It's turtles all the way down in the famous story. Where does it stop? The fact of the matter is there is a kind of reflectivity to social cognition that doesn't occur in other domains. This is whatever it is. It's not trying to make you think it's the Starship Enterprise, you know, or an aircraft carrier or something like that. It's just this thing, right? But we are always in the business of strategically trying to control other people's perceptions of us. And to the extent that other people care about us at all, they are constantly in the business of trying to read between the lines. And because we know that, we're constantly in the business of trying to give them the right lines to read through, okay? And if you don't believe this, just try it out with walk up to somebody and ask them for a date Friday night, okay? Oh, gee, I don't know. Gee, I might be busy. I might have to do my hair that night, or whatever it is that they say, right? And then you can say, well, would she really like to go out with me? And she just really can't. She really does have to wash her hair that night, or, you know, whatever it is, you know? And then she said, oh, geez, you know, this isn't working. I said, no, if you were the last man on earth, I wouldn't go out with you. You know, oh, she doesn't really mean that. That's what social interaction is like. And that's what we mean when we say that social interactions are cognitively mediated. We're trying to make sense of a vague, ambiguous, fragmentary stimulus world. How we do that, we'll start talking about next week. Thank you very much.